Welcome to another episode of The Catholic Novel. Today we're going to talk about Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. It's the only novel Wilde ever wrote. He was a popular playwright, and he was known also for these aphorisms, which are all very, very clever. Now maybe it's just me, but I find them a little on the cynical side, but that's what he was known for. But this novel is one terrific novel. I'd like to start by talking about the mystery of evil, because I think that's what this novel is all about. Almost everybody asks, why did these bad things happen? Why are there tsunamis? Why are there hurricanes dislocating people? Why is there starvation in the world? And a number of theologians have done a pretty good job trying to look at all of God's creation and explain why some of these things happen. But ultimately, physical evil, I think, remains a mystery. But in a sense, even more mysterious is moral evil. Why is there so much moral evil? Why is it that people do these horrible things? Now, my first answer is the mystery of freedom. God is so eager that we grow in our freedom. It's possible for a Mother Teresa to happen. Unfortunately, it's also possible for an Adolf Hitler to happen. Once God gives us freedom, he's taking a terrible chance. The French poet Charles Péguy has a lovely little poem about freedom, and he pictures God saying, once you know the love of free people, the obeisance of slaves has no interest for you. So I'm not going to explain moral evil, but we are going to focus on it through the vision of Oscar Wilde in this novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. The plot is, in a sense, rather simple. There's a picture drawn of Dorian Gray, who apparently is an incredibly handsome young man. And he is arguing with the painter, with the artist, and with a friend of his. Actually, there are four key characters in the novel. Dorian Gray, Basil Hallard, H-A-L-L-A-D, who did the painting, Lord Henry Wotton, and Sybil Vane, with whom Dorian Gray is madly in love for a short period of time. Those four characters. Now, in this, what I'm going to read to you now, they're arguing over who should have the picture. And the artist says, no, it's yours, Dorian. I did it for you. And here's what Dorian says. He accuses the painter of being more interested in the art objects than he is in people. Specifically, he's more interested in the painting of Dorian Gray than he is of Dorian Gray himself. And here's the section I'd like to read to you. This is Dorian speaking. Yes, he continued, I am less to you than your ivy Hermes or your silver fawn. You will like them always. How long will you like me? Until I have my first wrinkle, I suppose. I know now that when one loses one's good looks, whatever they may be, one loses everything. Your picture has taught me that. Lord Henry is perfectly right. Youth is the only thing worth having. When I find that I am growing old, I will kill myself. Hallard turned pale and caught his hand. Dorian, Dorian, he cried, don't talk like that. I have never had such a friend as you, and I shall never have such another. You are not jealous of material things, are you? Dorian speaking, I am jealous of everything whose beauty does not die. I am jealous of the portrait you have painted of me. Why should it keep what I must lose? Every moment that passes takes something from me and gives something to it. Oh, if it was only the other way. If the picture would change and I could be always what I am now. Why did you paint it? It will mock me in some way, mock me horribly. The hot tears welled into his eyes. He tore his hand away. And flinging himself on the divan, he buried his face at the cushions as if he was praying. And that is a crucial scene right at the beginning of the novel. And of course, what he prayed for actually happens. He stays young and extremely handsome, but every time he does something immoral, the picture begins to change. The first sin that is kind of recorded in the novel is, at one point he's madly in love with this actress, Sybil Vane. And he brings his two friends, Lord Henry and Basil, to see her perform. And she is awful. She is terrible. She gives an absolutely awful performance. And Dorian is embarrassed and extremely angry. And he speaks to her and she says, you taught me the difference between life and art. It's very nice to be an actress, but it's nothing like being in love. But Dorian then proceeds to be extremely cruel. Really tears her apart, says they're through, he doesn't want to see her anymore, and shortly after that she commits suicide. And it's after her suicide that Dorian first notices the picture has changed. And the rest of the novel, the picture keeps changing. He doesn't allow anybody to see it. He puts it in a closet, he covers it, but we know the picture is changing while he remains the same. I think that moral evil is quite mysterious, you know. You think of the Holocaust. You think of some of the I'm thinking of the earlier novel we did, Silence, the persecution that Christians underwent and became, you know, martyrs in Japan. I've heard this statistic, I don't know whether it's true or not, that in our country, every 15 seconds, there is a rape. You think of the violence, you think of murder, you think of the infidelities. I mean, we seem to be surrounded by sin, okay? And what this novel of Oscar Wilde does is it captures that. In a way, it's kind of simple. A picture changes, the person does it, but it's very, very powerful. I'd like to talk a little bit about Oscar Wilde's life. I think he was a kind of a genius. He, throughout his life, was attracted to Catholicism. As a matter of fact, there's a section in the novel. I wonder if Oscar Wilde is talking about himself. He's mentioning how Dorian Gray has these temporary commitments. Certain things overtake his life for a short time, but then they pass. And one of those things is Roman Catholicism. Let me read this to you. It was rumored of him, Dorian Gray, once that he was about to join the Roman Catholic communion. And certainly the Roman ritual had always great attraction for him. The daily sacrifice, more awful really than all the sacrifices of the antique world, stirred him as much by its superb rejection of the evidence of the senses as by the primitive simplicity of its elements and the eternal pathos of the human tragedy that it sought to symbolize. He loved to kneel down on the cold marble pavement and with the priest, in his stiff flowered cope, slowly and with white hands moving aside the veil of the tabernacle and raising aloft the jeweled lantern-shaped monstrance with that pallid white wafer that at times one would fain think is indeed the panis celestis, the bread of angels, or robed in the garments of the Passion of Christ, breaking the host into the chalice and smiting his breast for his sins. The fuming senses that the gray boys in their lace and scarlet tossed into the air like great gilt flowers had their subtle fascination for him. As he passed out, he used to look with wonder at the black confessionals and longed to sit in the dim shadow of one of them and listen to men and women whispering through the tarnished grating the true story of their lives. There's a famous biography of Oscar Wilde that makes little of his deathbed conversion. I have to disagree with that interpretation. It seems to me Oscar Wilde was attracted by Catholicism throughout his life. When he was a young man, there was some indication he was going to become a Roman Catholic, but his father said, if you do that, I will cut you out of your inheritance, and so he didn't do it. Later in his life, when he got involved in a lot of trouble, he said, I think if I had become a Catholic earlier in life, none of these things would have happened to me. I would not have gotten myself into this mess. Now, what mess did he get himself into? He had a gay love affair with Lord Douglas. And Lord Douglas's father, the Marquis of Queensberry, was publicly insulting Oscar Wilde and saying some terrible things about him. And against the advice of some of his friends, Oscar Wilde decided to sue the Marquis of Queensberry. And in the course of the trial, a number of facts became evident that Oscar Wilde was committing sodomy with young boys. So the judge finds Oscar Wilde guilty and gives him the strongest penalty possible, 2 years of hard labor. Wilde has lost everything. He's lost his fortune. He's lost, physically, the hard labor took a terrible toll on him. His wife leaves him, and he's forbidden to see his children. And yet, in some way, I think all this suffering leads him to an encounter with God. I'm going to borrow a section from a book that I like very much, What is God by John Hort. And this book has had a big impact on the way I think. So Oscar Wilde spends 2 years in jail, And while he's in jail, he is reading St. Augustine, Dante, and I'm sure these writers had an effect on his conscience. And so when he summarizes these 2 years' experience, here's what he writes. And John Hort quotes him, okay? So in this section of this book, What is God? Hort is saying one way to think about God is as the depth, D-E-P-T-H, the depth of experience. And he uses this example of Oscar Wilde as hitting the depth of himself. And the way Hort and Wilde say it is he found his soul. I think it's perfectly legitimate to say he found God. So here's what Wilde writes. I bore up against everything with some stubbornness of will and much rebellion of nature, till I had absolutely nothing left in the world but one thing. I had lost my name, my position, my happiness, my freedom, my wealth. I was a prisoner and a pauper, but I still had my children left. Suddenly, they were taken away from me by the law. It was a blow so appalling that I did not know what to do. So I flung myself on my knees and bowed my head and wept and said, the body of a child is as the body of the Lord. I am not worthy of either. That moment seemed to save me. I saw then that the only thing for me was to accept everything. Since then, curious as it will no doubt sound, I have been happier. It was, of course, my soul, in its ultimate essence, that I had reached. In many ways, I have been its enemy, but I found it waiting for me as a friend. And I think it's quite legitimate to substitute the word God for soul there. So on his deathbed, Oscar Wilde converts. And the priest who attended him on his deathbed has no doubt that Wilde knew what was going on, that he was trying to repeat the prayers with the priest. It's really a very, I think, as a Catholic, it's a very, very happy ending to a very, very sad life. So I have to disagree with the biographer who makes little of it. I don't think any Catholic reading about the end of Wilde's life would do that. You have the feeling he has finally found himself, he has found God, and he is home. As challenging as it is, I think you will enjoy the picture of Dorian Gray.